Man who survived a high-profile prison escape 6 years ago testified in a Buffalo courtroom today.
Our George Rickert was in the courtroom as David Sweat implicated Richard Matt for the 1993 murder of Deborah Mindel in Tonawanda. George.
Yeah, David Sweat says he does not know the two men who did time for that murder and never really knew the name of the victim. But he says the facts of the case closely match up with something that Richard Matt admitted to him before Matt was killed in their prison escape.
Mr. Sweat has zero to gain from testifying today.
David Sweat testified that as he and Richard Matt were planning their escape and cutting through the walls of Clinton Correctional Facility 6 years ago, Matt confided that he had once stabbed and strangled a nurse, a murder Matt said was planned by a police officer friend of his. When an investigator asked David Sweat about it this year, he said none of it sounded familiar. But Sweat says at the time he didn't want to get involved, but later cooperated because it's the right thing to do. Attorneys trying to vacate the conviction of James Pugh and Brian Scott Lorenz believe this presents the possibility that Richard Matt killed Deborah Mindel. Matt did live about a block away around that time.
You know, at the very least, this is evidence that the jury should have heard. This is the kind of evidence that a jury would want to hear. It's plainly a solid lead to another murder suspect.
But in cross-examination, prosecutor Colleen Curtin-Gable chipped away at Sweat's credibility. Sweat admitted half of what he pleaded to 20 years ago was made up to avoid the death penalty. And Gable noted that for a man who's been in solitary confinement for 6 years, a trip to Buffalo is a nice change. But Sweat lashed back. "You think I'm doing this to get out of my cell? This is exactly what I wanted to avoid."
The circumstances are difficult, but everything he said today made perfect sense. It all fit together. And I think that the district attorney's office, as I think I said before, needs to follow up on these allegations and investigate them. I mean, that's the bottom line.
This 440 hearing is expected to last at least a couple more days before State Supreme Court Justice Paul Wojtasek will have to decide whether or not there is enough new information that could have changed the outcome of the original trial 27 years ago. Live at State Supreme Court, George Rickert, News 4.